Welcome to Manga Art Class Anatomy. If you haven't done our art class before, we've done a faces, which you can view in the description below. So that is Manga Art Class faces in the description below. Today we're going to be going over how to design your own characters. So we're going to go through the anatomy, proportions, and how to design your own. And if you don't know what manga art is, it is a Japanese art style of comics. Having some fun today, we're going to be going through and making our own. All you'll need for this class is a pencil, paper, an eraser if it's not on your pencil, and a piece of scrap paper just to rest your hand on to avoid smudging on the paper. And then you can also use a ruler, a rubber eraser, or a clickable eraser, which I will be using today as well. And if you haven't received it already, be sure to view our Manga Art Class Anatomy reference packet. There's a bunch of really good references that we didn't get to cover in the class today, such as diagrams and examples and whatnot, apps you can use, further resources, so please be sure to check that out. This is a general overview of how we're going to be going through our art class today. So we'll be covering our female anatomy proportions in a digital fashion, our male anatomy proportions as well. So we're doing digital just so we can see it without the interference of my hand, so we get a little bit better idea of our proportions. Then we'll be doing a male example in digital, just so you can see how that's done. And then a female example in real time in pencil paper. And then a shading example, which will be paper and pencil, but it will be a speed drawing just to save time here. And then our process example in digital and trace over studies. So please feel free to skip around, fast forward, pause, wherever you'd like. Just go at whatever pace works for you. We're just going to be going through some of these things quickly and some of these things at a more moderate pace. So just feel free to use the video as it works for you. We're going to start our class today with covering the female body anatomy. So we're going to do it from a frontal view. We're going to start with head heights. So you can see that our average teenage character is about 6.5 heads high. You can see that we're putting in a basic skeleton, which is going to be the head at the top, our rib cage, and then our hips, which I kind of put as a little underwear shape, which I feel really helps get a good idea of where that is. We're going to go down and do our legs, and then the ankles are about half a head up from the bottom, and then the feet go to the very bottom of the length. Now I went a bit quickly through that, but the one thing that you want to notice when you're making your basic skeleton, when you start your character, is that the hands are about halfway through, about halfway down the thigh, that the arms from the shoulder to the elbow and the elbow to the wrist are the same size. So you can see on the diagram there. Also from the top of the leg, so that stick leg you see there, from the top of that to the knee, and the knee to the ankle is the same length as well. Another important thing to add is that the elbows will line up just about with the belly button, which you'll see is kind of halfway through the ribs and the hips. And the bottom of the underwear that we see there, that's going to be our halfway point through our body. So it's always going to be our halfway point in humans and in manga art. So that's from the about 3.25, since our total height of our figure is 6.5 heads. It's going to be about 3.25 heads. So you can put that line right away when you start. Once you've drawn those heads out, you can just put that line right away so you know your halfway point. That's what I usually do. And you can see here we're filling in our body here, adding our muscles. So I'm just going through and outlining. We're basically creating volume. So we're going to add some outlines. So we're adding our chest area. We're connecting the ribs to the hips, which has a slope. Now remember, all the lines of the human body and the manga body are always never going to be straight. They're going to be curved in some way, because even our bones and muscles are curved. And you're going to see in our reference packet, and also a little bit later in the class today, we're going to be going through how to create that volume. But for right now, we're just looking at proportions of the female body here. So you can see we're adding our hands, which we just do some simple shapes, putting some round areas for our joints so we know where those bend. And then we're going to add some details here, just tweaking a few things. And then I'm gonna draw over the human body, so in more detail. So you're gonna see more of that muscles coming out. I'm just drawing a little bathing suit here. And then we're just gonna go down the body. You're gonna see those the lines we drew where the joints bend. We're gonna go over those so those lines won't show. Just a suggestion of certain joints. And here we have very static pose, so you're probably not going to be using this pose too often. We're just using this as a way to understand the parts of the human body. So you can see we're just going over some of those lines, drawing in the collarbone, the bends between the skin on the elbow, so just a little line. And then just here we're going to close up on the head. So if you remember from our faces class, this is the head that goes with it. So what we've learned from the faces class we'll use here. So we're just doing a little close-up, adding in some features to our head here. So that's why we're going pretty quickly through it. If you do want to see how we made the heads today, please view our Manga Art Class faces video. The link is going to be in the description below if you want to check that out. So now we've got our head done for our female figure. We're just going to go through and establish those outlines, add a little bit more detail. See that we're actually using digital drawing here, just so that you could better see the proportions of the female form without having the interference of my hand. We will be going over the drawing with a pencil, but for our proportions, we're just going to be doing it digitally. So that's why it looks probably a little different than what you're used to. So we're just adding details here, so our fingers, our hands, our toes, that kind of fun stuff. So you'll see a little bit more detail in our class reference packet about how to create those hands and the feet as well. So you can see here we have our female figure in proportion. Going to go through and show you right through the body all the steps we made to get to the point where we are, from skeleton to building blocks, muscles, and then the finished product. And here we're going to start with the male body now. So we're going to learn those proportions. So you can see we're starting with the head just like we did before. Usually when I draw a pose, I usually start with the torso since it is the center of things, but for our proportions, I'm going to start with the head here. So we still have the same head height of 6.5 heads. Still going to put that halfway point at 3 1/4 heads down. Now, one of the big differences you're going to see between a female and the male anatomy is the male hips are more narrow, while the female hips are a little more even with the shoulders, while the male ones are a little smaller or more narrow in width with the shoulders. And the shoulders are also a little bit bigger, so you'll see there are more circles than those flat circles we had in the female anatomy form. So that is a good way to differentiate between the two. You can see that our elbows still line up with our belly button, that the ankles are still about a half a head high, so those proportions will still be the same no matter what body type, age, gender, or whatnot that you're doing. Those are the things that usually stay consistent, unless it's exaggerated, such as a cartoon character. Now we're going to start adding our volume now that we have our skeleton pinned down. So we're going to add the shoulders, we're going to add the form around the torso, going into the hips. We're going to make like a little pointed oval, kind of a potato shape for the shoulders, or are actually the deltoids. They're sort of in that shape, as you can see from the right muscle diagram, the right hand of our side of our screen. We're going to put some of the lines where our joints are, where they bend, just so we remember that's where they bend. And that will come in handy when we're doing more active and dynamic poses, where there's a lot more movement and bends in the body. So now that we've got the volume of the male form down, we're just going to go through and make the head here. Again, if you want to see how we made the head here, go over to our Manga Art Class Faces video, which will be a link in the description. Now that we have our male head done, we're just going to go over and add that musculature to the, or the suggestion, I should say, of musculature to the male form here. So we're just going to do pretty much the outlines. The only time the lines will be going inside the inside of the frame is if we're suggesting the pectoral muscles, the abdominals, so the abs, or if we're showing the bottom of the arm, which is our tricep, overlapping with our bicep, which is that little crease you sometimes see in the elbow. Then we're just going to be doing a little swim trunks here as well, and then we're going to be going through and making it look a little bit more realistic here. So you can see no lines on those joints. We're just going to be putting in our fingers, our toes, and our general outline. So as you can see here, this is how we set up making the proportions and the breakdown of the male figure. Let's get started here on applying what we've learned about the male body and how to apply it in making our very own poses. So here you can see at the top left, I have a little example from one of my favorite apps called Magic Poser. You can get this at the App Store or Google Play. I just use it to get an idea and some ideas for poses. As you can see, I did the one on the very right. So I'm just making the skeleton here. You can see I'm drawing those lines between so I draw the head lengths, then I do the halfway point, the half head height for the foot, and the way you figure out like bends in the arm, just think of it where we would usually put it, so the belly button, and then just draw an arching line towards where it's moving to, kind of like it's pivoting. That line is pivoting from the shoulder. So that's a good way to figure out where to put that elbow, and just make sure that that line from the shoulder to the elbow and the elbow to the wrist is even. If you're having difficulty figuring out how to set up the skeleton, please jump ahead to the end of the video where we go over how to trace over already made manga pages from our favorite artists. So this will go over how the skeleton is set up and how you can kind of use it and understand it on your own that way. So there's a few different ways of going about it. So, but follow along here, see what you understand, and to try it yourself. If it's a little tricky, it just comes with practice. That's one of those things. Also check out our reference packet. It does have some already made skeletons that you can draw on top of, so you can get a little bit better understanding. And there's also our head chart and practice sheets and trace overs as well. So feel free to take a look at that and see if it helps you out. And now we're going to start building putting our muscles in, so such as the clavicle, the shoulder, the pectoral muscles, which are at an angle. We're also going to be doing the shapes of the arms and legs. So think of them as kind of like cylinders that taper a little bit at the ankle and the wrist. So that's the best way I like to think about it. I always like to start with the torso, and then work my way to the limbs. And as you can see here, I am tweaking things as I go. Feel free to correct or tweak or anything like that as you go. It shouldn't affect your proportions too much, as long as you keep in fact the basic markers I mentioned before of where the torso ends, how many lengths things are, and whatnot. That, as long as you follow those, even if you tweak things a little bit or realize something's a little bit off, it still should look proportionally correct. Now I'm going to start drawing in that musculature. What I usually like to do is I like to start with the head. It gives us some confidence. It also, if we're drawing with pencil and paper, it's usually less likely to smudge if we start at the top. So I like to start with the face, ears, the hair, and whatnot, and work my way down. Some people like to draw the body as is, and sometimes I'll put clothes on and then only draw the exposed parts. So it really depends on how you work with things. You'll see us put that into practice a little bit later about how we switch between those things. So you can see right here, I'm actually drawing the clothing rather than just going right in and putting in those muscles, because some of the arms are covered by poofy sleeves or wrinkly sleeves, so you won't be really seeing much of that muscle. So that's why I didn't draw them. And you can even see I add a little reference in there because I'm not too familiar with drawing shorts. And if you're ever unfamiliar with anything, just like I did today, feel free to find a picture or a photo, or even use yourself as a reference, because sometimes it can be hard to understand how things fold or wrinkle or layer on top of each other. So I definitely recommend that, especially if you're doing something new or going into a new territory. It is nice to have some reference, which is what I have on the side here. So I'm adding some shoes, some pants, some clothes, and then the exposed areas I'm putting in so the hands and the legs are the parts that I'll be drawing in the muscles, or a little bit more of the kneecap and whatnot. We're just going to add some more details, so dark outline on certain places where there would be shadows, such as under the arms, the crease of the pants, onto the shorts, a little bit here and there, so you'll see I'll be adding those. And for fun, I'll be adding some flames to the hands, because why not have a fire user once in a while? Just a kick of whimsy. And there we are, a male figure in our own pose using the proportions that we learned. And we'll be doing some more examples later on so you can see it used in many different ways. So now we're going to start with our female body example. We're going to do this in real time on pencil and paper. So you can see on the right hand side we're just going to go through our steps here. So on the top left you see I have the basic pose, little mini skeleton just to work off of. That's a convenient way to go about it. So we're going to start with our face here. And if you want to learn about how to make faces, it's in the Manga Art Class Faces video. I'm going to say it a few times. So we're just drawing our head here in a 3/4 view, putting our basic guidelines up for our eyes, our nose, and our mouth. Now that we got the head done, we're going to add a little stick for the neck. Now we're going to start drawing our guidelines. So it's going to be our head lengths. It's more of a straight-on pose and not receding into space or anything like that. It should be pretty straightforward. So we're just going to draw those little lines. So it should be about 6.5 in length, including the head itself. So I'm just doing that here. And I'm going to find the halfway point as well, which I'll find in a moment. And I'm going to draw the ribcage shape. So it's kind of like an oval shape with a little divot in the center for where the ribcage comes up to the sternum in the center, which you would have seen in the proportions area of the video when we draw the ribcage. I always recommend putting a line down the middle of it just to give yourself an idea of the volume and where it's facing. Now that we have the rib cage done, we're going to move down, and there's two different ways you can go about drawing the hips and the pelvis area. So you can draw a line down for the spine connecting to what I call the underwear shape of the pelvis, or you can do a kind of a shape going down into the pelvis, so it like connects at a circle, so it makes it kind of look like an eggy-like shape connecting to the underwear shape. So there's two different ways. I just wanted to show both so that whatever people like to do, they can do. And I'm going to move down. I'm going to draw a little line going across just so I know to keep the legs apart. It's very easy to forget that our pelvis is wide and our legs are set apart. So sometimes we can put them a little too close together. Now I'm just showing you right here, I'm just redrawing those guidelines for our legs here. Just going to put in kind of an oval-like shape for our shoulder. Since it's going to be closest to us, it's going to be sticking out. So it's going to be, think of it kind of like sitting on top of that rib cage shape. I'm going to be drawing the other shoulder, but we're going to think of that one as behind the rib cage shape. I'm just drawing through it so you can see the circle. I do recommend drawing through objects and then just erasing the overlapping shapes later on. It just makes it easier to understand, in my opinion. So I'm just redrawing that line for the knee. I'm going to draw a curve coming off of that line because the legs are going off to the side. The leg in the back is going to look like it's behind. So we're going to do that to kind of give it the impression that the legs are in the right spot. They're not going to be the same distance as it looks like to us. That's why the curve is so important. It tells us where those knees lie. It just makes it a little easier all around. And then I'd like to draw little circles for where things bend. It reminds me where they're supposed to be, and where to draw the joints, where they can bend and whatnot. I'll just draw a little foot shape here. And since it's pointing downward, it's not going to fit exactly within that half head length right there, just because it's pointing. If it was sitting straight up, then it would fit within those two lines. But in this case, it's pointing down, so it's a little different. But it is a good guideline to work off of. So a good way to find out where the knees lie is taking that ankle point and then the point on the hip and drawing a circle in the midpoint between the two. And then you just want to draw the arch, keeping in mind that you want the legs to be the same length, so from the pelvis to the kneecap. So as long as you make sure it's the same length, you kind of want to make the arch keeping that in mind. So it's going to be usually a pretty wide arch. And since it's not going back in space, this won't be distorted. So now we're going to draw the arms. We have a great marker of midpoint between the rib cage and the hips. It's where the belly button is, and that is where our elbow is going to lie. So we're going to draw a very slight arch between it. Just, you can see right there that I did the marker, and then I did the arch from the belly button. So just a very slight one to connect up to. It's kind of like connect the dots. You could even draw a line. You don't have to draw the arch necessarily. I just do it for myself to remind myself of the swivel motion of the arm. You could just draw the arm coming out and then connecting with the line that we drew out from the belly button. It is up to you. But I draw a little circle for the elbow. So that's kind of our midpoint in our arm. So you can see right here, I'm just giving you. So this arm is going to be unique. It's going to be using something called foreshortening, which I'm going to cover a little bit later. But for now, you're going to see that second part of the arm is going to be shorter because it's going to be receding into space. And again, we're going to cover that later, so just don't worry about it now. And either you can copy that line or you'll find out later on. So we're just going to draw the other arm using the same method. We're just going to make a little oval shape for the hand as well. So we now have our basic skeleton all put out here. So now we're going to work on building volume. So we've already established our pose, our basic skeleton, our proportions, and we'll be working on establishing volume. So we're going to make cylinders for the, so just think of them as little cylinders for the arm pieces. It's a good way to think about it in 3D, because it is going to be a 3D shape. I'm just going to get my scrap paper out, just so I don't smudge my drawing that I've drawn so far. I'm going to draw out a cylinder for the neck as well, and that's going to be going over our rib cage because our neck connects to our rib cage over it. And I'm going to do a line for the collarbone. It's going to connect to the circle of the shoulder, and then I'm just going to draw the chest right here, or the pectorals, whichever character you're drawing. I'm going to do some lines down. I like to do a little half circle shape instead of the rib cage, just so I don't get too confused. I actually have this little figure here. It's called called Bodycon Body-chan. It's a posable figure. Sometimes I use it to get pose ideas. It's really convenient to know how things bend. We do have the apps that I mentioned in the reference packet, but this is one of the resources that you could use as well. You don't necessarily need it, but it is a nice thing to have if you're interested in it. We also have your basic wooden figure that you'll see in the store. It's useful for knowing where things bend and the proportions and whatnot, but it doesn't exactly bend fully the way a human body does, but it is a good starting point. So you can see here a little bit of the video blipped out for a moment while I was putting in some of those forms. I'm just going to go over some of my lines for you. So you can see we're drawing those cylinders, and then we're drawing the joints as ball, like a ball, a sphere, and then just put those cylinders between it, just so you get an idea. If you ever want to draw a line around the middle of the shape, to remind yourself that it's a round shape, sometimes I do that, and it does really help. So just right here, we're putting in here, you can see the arm right there. I'm drawing through the arm so you can get an idea about how they overlap. So you can see that our left arm here overlaps with the right, so it's going into space towards us. That's again what they call foreshortening. And then we'll just draw some line for the knuckles on the hands, a thumb. We'll go down and connect some of the body parts here, just so we get an idea of how things are three-dimensionally, because I think that's when we're drawing, we often forget things are three-dimensional. I'll draw a little cylinder right here, shows you kind of what the pieces of the arm look like separately. And if you're ever having a hard time figuring out how wide the shoulders should be apart, it's usually about 1.5 heads in width, roughly. You can even use your own body as an example of how far apart they need to be. And then we're going to move down here to the leg area. So just going to draw a little circle here so you can get an idea of the shape, the 3D shape that we have for our pelvis. Now when we're drawing down from the hips to the knee for our thigh right here, we're going to make it kind of a tapering cylinder. So it's going to start thick, kind of rounder, going around the glutes, the glutamus maximus, and then we're going to draw the line down, or behind as we like to say it. We're going to go down and finish that cylinder off. Now because our other leg is kind of behind it and the way it's positioned, we're going to have the other leg kind of start partway down the left leg, just because it's overlapping. So our left leg is overlapping our right. Gives it more of the impression that it connects in the hips. So we're just going to draw the cylinder. And then we're going to draw another sphere for our kneecap. We'll actually change this a little bit later to actually look like the kneecap, but for now it gives us an idea of how it bends. So we're going to go down and we're going to make our other cylinder. This gives us a better idea of how the knee and how the leg itself bends by remembering that they're like the cylinder shape. It will help out later on. You'll notice right here I'm double checking, and I realize the distance between the bottom of the leg to the knee isn't the same as the top, which is something that I caught early on, thankfully. So I was able to adjust it, put the foot up a little bit higher than I expected. This won't mess up the proportions too much because we were fairly rough with our head length earlier, and it's only a little change, so it'll still be proportional. But we do want to make sure, one of the big things you want to make sure is to make sure that the portions of the leg are even to each other, especially if they're straight on. So I'm just fixing that here. Redrawing the foot. And now it should be in correct proportion. So you can see I'm drawing a line right here. This is roughly where the leg actually starts. That little connection area is kind of more of the upper thigh, glute territory. I just put it there also so I have an idea of the shape as well. And right now I'm just drawing a line going around the foot. I actually have a diagram of this in our reference packet. It just kind of gives an idea of the three parts of the foot I usually like to pay attention to, being the heel, the toe, and the middle arch of the foot. We're also going to draw a little bump for the ankle bone, just a little suggestion of it. And I realized we forgot the ear here, so just adding that ear up on top. Now we're going to go and erase. You'll see that I'm speeding this up a little bit just because we're erasing here. So we're erasing all the internal lines, the see-through lines, so that way only the things overlap and the item that's closer to us is going to be outlined, so the stuff in the back will be erased. So I'm just going through with a rubber eraser just to lighten things up. It's something you press against it to take some of the pencil off of it. And then I'm just going to go through and add some of the facial features. I am speeding it up for that section just because we did cover our faces in our last video. So we're just going to speed through the face, and then we're going to get back to the body and the body proportions after. And now I'll be doing the hair for the head. We're just going to speed up through this one, so you'll notice it is a speeded up video, just because it is something we've covered already and to save a little time. Lots of stuff to cover. Now I will note something when you are doing long hair, since we are doing a longer hair here that you can see down the body as opposed to before, is that you want some movement to it. You don't want it to be symmetrical on the left and the right, not normally, unless they're standing still and looking straight on for the most part. So you want to have some asymmetry. You can see on the right hand side I have body and clothing listed right after one another. I usually do these actually at the same time, so I usually draw the clothing in, and then whatever parts of the body they're exposed, then I'll add a little bit more form, a little bit more realism to the skin and to the arm or leg or whatnot, just because it seems kind of redundant to draw something that'll be covered, unless you have someone with more body to them or more curves. So you can see I'm just drawing in. I had an idea already of kind of what I wanted to draw for the clothing, but if you are having a hard time coming up with clothes ideas, online is a great resource to find some things, fashion magazines and whatnot. So feel free to look at those to get some ideas, but I'll just be going through the basics of the outfit, not too detailed yet. I usually like to start clothing from top to bottom. And you can go about it any way you like, especially if you're doing a cape or something flowing. You can always do it that way. If you're doing something more structured, you can go about it any which way you like. But the first thing I would do is get the rough shapes down, get the broad shapes. As my teacher used to say, you have to bake the cake before you ice it. So you're going to start with the cake, and then the icing, which are the details we'll do later, such as patterns and buttons and zippers and all that fun stuff. So we're just going to do the basic shapes of what we want, our sleeves, the body of the clothing, and whatnot, or whatever outfit we're doing. One thing I would note when you're making clothing, especially when the body is turned away from you, is to make sure you keep in mind the midpoint of the body. So if you're doing a belt, such as I'm drawing here, belt buckle, you want to make sure that's going to be lined up. If it's off, it's going to look strange, and instinctively you'll know, but not necessarily know why. So make sure to keep that in mind. Another nice way of making things seem like they have depth is creating a little bit of overlap. So you'll see also in the belt that I'm creating a little bit of the lip over the sides, so over the sides of the body, and then also a little lip of the belt going over the belt buckle going over the belt. So this gives the impression that things are overlapping. It gives a sense of depth, and even though it's just the smallest of changes. So keep those in mind as you're drawing your clothing. Any parts of the body that you've already drawn, such as if you drew an elbow, nook, or whatnot, and you're covering it with your clothing, just be sure to erase it on your way. It makes it less confusing later on, so we don't confuse it as part of the outfit. One thing I can tell you about pants, specifically shorts, you gotta think of them like kind of like cones. I like to draw a C shape for the bottom hemline of the pants. So just make sure, especially if you're looking under and then you're getting some of the shadow from the inside of the pant, as opposed to if you're looking over and you're getting more of a downward curve, you're gonna just want to make sure you keep those in mind of which way the pants are curving, so if they're being, which way they're being seen, which is usually dependent on the pose, which our pose makes it so you can see a little bit of the inside of the pant, or the short in this case. One thing that's good to remember when you do boots is that it's not going to be so tight that it's going to be directly in line with the skin, unless it's super like leather tight. In this case, it's going to be slightly off from the skin, so you'll see I'm putting a little bit of a line away from the thigh when we get closer to the top of the boot. So just keep that in mind as well. Think of it, think of it all in 3D, which could be a little hard when you're starting off, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. Or just copying things. You'd be surprised how much it can help you learn how things are supposed to look, especially when you're drawing your anime characters. You can see I'm bringing out my posable figure again to show you how the curve of the knee, you see that the bottom of the kneecap is curved downward, so that upper part of the leg, that's why the actual top of the boot is going to be curved down, because it goes with the curve of the leg and the curve of the kneecap. So just keep an eye on that when you're going about it. And at this stage, you can always add some props. So in this case, because we're doing a library manga art class, we're going to be having a book prop, which is where we're going to be putting it in that left hand right there, or her right, our left. So we're just going to do the book. And if you want to do any book props, remember, just think of it like two planes of a square. So two pieces of rectangle. That's basically all it is. But lots of fun stuff within. Now that we have our basic shapes for all of our clothing, we're going to go into the nitty-gritty, so our details. We're going to erase anything that overlapped that we didn't get to before, and then we're going to add a pattern and folds and maybe a little shadow as we go along, depending on how we like to take it. So we're really going to get to the nitty-gritty details. So what I like to do is I like to add a motif. So that's when something is repeated throughout. So that makes the outfit look more cohesive. So if there's lots of zippers or buttons or buckles or whatnot, in this case I like piping. So I like doing piping around the edges of things, stripes, belts, that type of thing. So that's what I'm doing in this case. So you'll see a bit of that repeated throughout the clothing design. I also really like that keyhole shape we did with the neckline, so I'm going to repeat that throughout just a little bit. You don't actually need to repeat motifs. I just think it brings the outfit together. You can see right here, I'm just making the top of the boot a little bit longer. I found that when they were thinner, it looked too much similar to the pant leg. I also thought we could also incorporate that little keyhole notch in it, just like we did with the pants and the bottom of the tunic, so we could add a little bit more cohesion throughout. Now we're going to add the really small details. You don't have to add these. I'm just very detail oriented in general, so I usually go over the top. So things like boot laces, and if you're doing really fine textures like of a scarf or whatnot, tassels, that type of thing. This is a good time to do it. I usually save it till last just in case there's anything off and you need to move around. It's best not to do them too early unless you have to. So then you'd have to erase them and start over. So, and you can see I've left the hands for last. Is it because hands are my weakness? Yes, yes, yes it is. Now with the hands are actually one of the more expressive parts, going along with the face. So the face and the hands are the most expressive parts of the human body. It's the places that we look for when we look for emotion first. So the hands are actually very important. If you do have trouble drawing hands, just remember that the palm is a square shape. The thumb goes closer to the bottom of the hand, the palm, and the fingers go on top in an arch shape. You'll see a little bit more of the dot on the diagram that's in the reference packet that outlines the shape of our hand. And then you can see right here we're just going in and we're adding some details. We're doing the other hand as well with the fingers holding the book. Now it's always nice partway through to take a little break and see what you want to change or want to add. I decided that I wanted to make the hair on the right hand side flow a little bit more with the tunic on the right side. So I changed that. I'm going to go through and add, I wanted to do a little hair accessory where the hair comes off the head. So a little bit of this and that. And with art it's okay to go overboard, so go overboard and have fun and let your creativity run wild. Now, if we're intending on inking our illustration after we've drawn out the details, I would just stop right here. But since we're with this illustration, we're just going to go in and do our details with pencil. So we're going to add some dark lines for where the shadow is. So we are going to speed things up a bit just when we're going through it. So we're going to add the little dark corners, anything that's filled in dark, such as right underneath the belt, under the chin, under the hairline. We're going to add those little areas. We're going to outline some of the lines we got lost due to smudging when we were going around. If there's any details that we forgot, we can add those in. So I'm just going to go through and add those. And there we have it. We have our female figure here from top to bottom, clothing from skeleton to clothing to details. So we're going to show a few more examples here so you can get a better idea. So this one here is an illustration I've already completed. I'm just going to show you how you can shade with pencil. So I am going to speed it up a bit. Some notes on the side of things to keep in mind as you're shading. You're going to want to make sure you keep an eye for those cast shadows, such as under the hair, or in this case under the bottom of the cloak here. Where the wrinkles are, so there might be some shadows near the wrinkles. But shadows usually mimic the shape of whatever's casting it, or the wrinkle itself, or whatnot. So that's usually the shape of the shadow. And then try adding small little hints of dark. So like the inside of the collar here, the inside of the shirt cuff. Sort of nice little additions that really make it pop. I also recommend starting off light. So So start your shadowing and your shading off light, and then you can work up to those darks later, but if you start dark, it's going to be a little harder to erase. So that's the way I like to approach it. You could see that he's holding a book and scrolls, because library themed, manga art class, you have to have some books in there. And we're also going to use to darken those lines. That's what we call a contour line. So when a line suggests shadow, it's just a fancy way for saying a darker line in the right place makes it look more defined and looks like it has more of a shadowed area. And when we shade, we're going to want to avoid what we call pillow shading. So that's when looks like a pillow. So when we just shade around all the edges of something and leave the middle light, that doesn't look too realistic. You can get away with it with hair for the most part, but we're going to want to avoid it for the most part. We're also going to want to try to avoid smudging, especially with our pencil. Having that scrap paper really does help, but it sometimes is unavoidable. So just keep an eye for that in case it does smudge on the way. And here we have our male figure with shading and our line quality here. Next up, I wanted to cover foreshortening. I could go for a whole class just talking about it, but I'm just going to give you the basics. So that just means that our foreground is going to be distorted. So foreground as opposed to background being the items that are closest to us. So you can see like here with this fist in the way, you're not going to see the forefront of the arm because it's going to be blocking it. Our mind knows what it means. Our mind knows that it's there, but you're not going to see the whole thing. So it's going to be distorted where you're only going to see part of it. So it can be kind of hard to draw because our brain doesn't fully understand the distortion, which is why it's so important to have reference when you're working in that sort of pose. But it really does give a certain dynamic quality to the pose that you're doing. So something to keep in mind. You just think of the shape, use spirals if that helps, but working from reference is really the best way to get the hang of it. Here I want to start another example where I've started off with a really messy gestural sketch. I'm going over it just to show you that of how we're using that that knowledge that we've used so far of the geometric shapes, of the skeleton, of the proportions, and how we can apply it towards a full illustration, not just the figure itself. So you can see right here, just outlining the body from our gestural sketch, adding in some of those geometric shapes so we get a sense of where things are. So really loose, keep it really loose when you're sketching this stage especially, and then going through and making a little bit more anatomically correct in terms of where muscles are. And we're adding in our clothing, so in this case armor. So we're adding kind of a steampunk armor thing going on here. So you can see that we're drawing in all of our details here, getting some of the nitty-gritty, and then drawing the actual figure. And so just a kind of a quick go through of how we went about that before and now. And then I'm going to show you using a photo and an anime picture of how we can make our own poses, or just understand where the skeleton and muscle is. So right here, I'm just showing you how we put the skeleton in the form, and then we put the volume, and then the details, and the clothes and whatnot. So you can see on the left I've made the skeleton, the right we've added the skeleton, now we're adding the muscles. I'm going to go through different colors so you can see them. Right now we have the geometric shapes, so you can get an idea of the angle. I'm just erasing those so we can go on to making it a little bit more realistic with the skin and the bends of the body. And then we're going to actually draw. I'm going to draw here the person. So starting with the head and the hair, I'm going to draw the clothes over. So I'm doing the clothes first in this case, adding some of the shading, then doing the actual figure, so the hands and the body, the arms in this case. And then a little bit of stars for fun. So you can see by using an image, or let's say you use a scan or one of the pictures online printed out, even just tracing over it on paper or using tracing paper, we can kind of understand how the poses were created and the inner proportions and anatomy. So we can create our own design. And that's it for this class. We've made it through successfully. Now you can go out and create your own characters. And I'd love to see what you've made. Please send me an email, or you can hit us up on TPL Teen Instagram with a private message or a like, a comment. We're also on YouTube under Tewksbury Library, or you can comment on Tewksbury Lib through our Facebook. So feel free. We love to see what you've been